Hello everyone, Professor Leis here. I hope everyone's doing well. In this video, I'm going to read through and explain the prompt for major essay project number 3. But before I jump in, I just want to provide a little bit of context. So in this prompt, I borrow from a composition book called Habits of the Creative Mind. And it's a book I use in my English 100 and English 1 courses, first year composition. So forgive me if this seems a little out of the blue, but just a little bit of context there. I really like the way that Miller and Jurecic, the authors of this book, conceive of writing, and so we're borrowing that and kind of applying it to our process. But we'll get to everything's an argument by and by, don't worry. So let's go ahead and get started here. In their book, Habits of the Creative Mind, authors Richard E. Miller and Ann Jurecic write that the writing prompt, properly conceived, is an invitation to embark into unmapped worlds, to improvise, to find unexpected beauty in the challenges that arise. In our final essay project of the semester, we are challenged to write a research-based essay of at least 8 to 10 pages, more than 2,000 words, that explores a particular aspect of a topic that genuinely interests us. Typically, in a research-based essay, we may be tempted to choose a position in a debate and find evidence to support our position. This model is the basis for the 5-paragraph essay, a model we are no longer using. However, as Miller and Jurecic explain in Habits of the Creative Mind, we know that practicing argument as debate produces writing that isn't persuasive or compelling or interesting to read. So in our classes, we ask our students to think of essay writing as a speculative journey. What's the difference? When you write speculatively, you begin not with a predetermined destination, your thesis, but with the goal of answering a question or solving a problem. You consider different routes to get to this goal. You do research and rethink your plan. You learn more and more. You write, make mistakes, and head off in new and unanticipated directions. You make discoveries. Your paper is your attempt to come to some kind of answer to your question. How are you putting pieces of information together to create new meaning? How are you connecting different ideas together to create new ideas? The goal for this writing project is not to try to convince or persuade your readers that your position is right. When released from the burden of trying to persuade our readers, we can then use our writing as a way of learning for us, which, ultimately, is one of the most important purposes of writing. This will also influence the tone you take in your essay. Seek to build an invitational tone, not a confrontational, adversarial, or arrogant tone. So let's pause for a second and discuss these ideas so far. So Miller and Jurecic, as I mentioned, they conceive of writing in a way that I think is very productive and interesting and fruitful for us. So they make an important distinction between argument as debate and argument as speculative journey. And so argument as debate, that's the basis of the 5-paragraph essay model, which we're all pretty used to, where we have a position, we come up with a position on an issue, and what we do is try to find evidence to prove that our position is right. What ends up happening is we often exclude any information that would kind of damage our argument, and we certainly aren't using writing as a mode of learning because we're just trying to find stuff that we already think is true, right? That already confirms our position. When we use argument as a speculative journey, though, we're setting out with the intention of answering an open-ended question or developing a potential problem, or potential solutions to a problem, exploring an idea in more complex and nuanced ways. So we're not going out with that predetermined destination in mind. We're going out to try to see what we can learn about something. And so what ends up happening is we use writing as a mode of learning for us, which is what we're trying to accomplish here. Let's go ahead and continue on here. Begin by doing some exploratory research about a topic that interests you, an event, a concept or idea, a cultural phenomenon, or potential solutions to a problem. As Miller and Jurecic suggest in their book, begin in a state of not knowing, rather than committing yourself to a claim you came up with before you've done any curiosity-driven research. In our course textbook, Everything's an Argument, Lunsford and Ruskevich offer some advice that pairs well with Miller and Jurecic's statement. They write, familiarize yourself with what's been said about your subject, and especially with the controversies that currently surround it. After a while, questions about this topic should arise. Craft an open-ended question about your topic. Open-ended questions can't be easily answered and require careful research and consideration. Embrace confusion and complexity. Don't shy away from the gray areas of an issue. So this is really important to go back to what we were talking about with argument as speculative journey. When you begin in a state of not knowing, you're more apt to consult a wider range of sources. You're more apt to think more deeply and meaningfully about certain ideas. You're approaching topics with an openness that's important for learning. And you're not kind of biased against certain types of sources or certain types of information, because really you're just trying to weigh the best options or put pieces of information together in a satisfying way to address the question that you've set out for yourself, right? So it's important to begin in that state of not knowing. Don't just say, well, I'm going to try to argue the point that I think this, and just try to find evidence to support that, because again, that doesn't help us learn anything in the end. So in order to do all this, we need to consult a wide range of sources. So let's go ahead and look at some of those particulars. We are challenged to incorporate material from at least 8 credible and relevant sources, 5 of which should be found using the library's online databases. Gale ebooks and opposing viewpoints and context are good starting points. They're useful for providing background information and pointing us in the direction of other sources, but also use EBSCOhost to find some of your sources. In order to adopt the voice of a reasonable, fair-minded, and careful thinker who is interested in coming as close to the truth about a topic as possible, we must consult a wide variety of sources and a wide variety of perspectives, even if they are ones we do not hold ourselves. So again, that's why it's important to begin in that state of not knowing. But in order to begin to get closer to the truth, we need to consult a wide array of sources. So to ensure that, we need to have a minimum of 8 credible and relevant sources. 5 of those must come from the library's online databases. Now, there's a separate video where I walk you through that process of using some of the different databases to find sources. So be sure to check that video out. But we need to make sure that at least 5 of those sources come from the library's online databases. Let's continue. Before committing to a topic, think about your own values and interests in the world. What do you hold to be important? What are your career goals? What are your hobbies? What sparks your curiosity and imagination? Topics that we have a personal stake in tend to be more interesting to research and write about, and consequently, more interesting for our audience to read about. As Lunsford and Ruskevich write, look for an issue that intrigues you, one you want to learn about. One of the hardest parts of producing an academic argument is finding a topic narrow enough to be manageable in the time you have to work on it, but also rich enough to sustain your interest over the same period. Rather than researching the topic generally, however, try to find a specific conflict, issue, or question within this topic. We want to be as narrow and specific as we can for such a short paper. No, I didn't mean that last statement sarcastically. In the grand scheme of things, 8 to 10 pages is actually not that long of a paper. It might be long for us, especially if we're beginning writers. So I'm not trying to suggest this is easy, but I want us to put things in perspective here. 8 pages isn't enough to solve the world's problems, unfortunately. If it were, I think we would have solved them by now, right? But 8 pages is enough to narrow down on something specific, some kind of specific aspect of a problem, and try to see if we can get closer to solving it, right? So that's why it's important to be specific with the topic that we're selecting. We don't want to research the issue as a whole. We want to find a particular aspect within the issue that we can really look at carefully and closely to make sure that we are specific enough and can write those 8 to 10 pages. Now, usually this is kind of counterintuitive, but the more specific we are with our topic, the more we have to say about it, because we realize that there's actually a lot of complexity there. But when we're general or kind of vague, we speak about the things in abstraction, and so we're not very specific, and we usually end up only writing 5 pages and then running out of things to write about. So I'll be posting resources that will help us figure how to narrow our topics down a little bit. If your topic is a controversial one, simply meaning that there are more or multiple perspectives surrounding a single issue, then seek to write a Rogerian argument. As Lunsford and Ruskovich point out, a Rogerian argument approaches audiences in non-threatening ways, finding common ground and establishing trust among those who disagree about issues. To build this trust, it is important to fully, fairly, and even sympathetically state the opposition's position. The key to Rogerian argumentation, continue Lunsford and Ruskovich, is a willingness to think about opposing positions and to describe them fairly. Approaching an argument in this fashion enables the writer to seek an understanding of ideas before casting judgment on them. After all, when we understand the motives behind certain perspectives and acknowledge any merits of those perspectives, we can hold our own opinions with greater conviction. Now, this is something that we are practicing in Major Essay Project 2 when we are trying to analyze the underlying values that are motivating the author's position on an issue we disagree with. Right? So it's kind of practicing that. So that's what I'm going to encourage you to try to do if you are focused on a controversial issue, meaning, again, just a perspective that might have a lot of different perspectives on a given issue or question. Note, there are certain topics that we may not write about, not because they are unimportant issues, but because they tend to lead us into dogmatic or ideological corners that are hard to get out of. These topics include whether abortion is moral or immoral or should be legal or illegal, whether gun control is good or bad, whether we should have the death penalty, whether immigration is good or bad, and whether a God or afterlife exists, among a few others. The arguments for these issues tend to be repetitive. If you have a particular angle regarding one of these topics that you think will lead you into new territory, let's talk about it first. All topics should be approved before you begin the composition of your essay. So again, to reiterate, these topics, I'm not suggesting that they're not important. Quite the contrary. Indeed, they are important, and that's why they've amassed the attention that they have over the decades or even centuries in some cases. But usually when we approach these topics, we tend to already have our positions in mind, and we tend to argue dogmatically from those positions, and it's hard for us to then use writing as a mode of learning because we're just seeking to get our position out or kind of prove the opposition wrong. So that's why I don't want us to write about these topics. Again, not because I think they're unimportant. They indeed are important, but in a lot of ways they can be a little counterproductive with an assignment or project like this. So guess what though? The rest of the cosmos, the entire cosmos, is your playground of ideas. So just because you can't write about these few doesn't mean that there is nothing to write about. Indeed, that is simply not true. So have fun. Look around. See what catches your interest. And I'm going to encourage you to think about this in a non-schoolish way, meaning you don't need to pick a topic that is serious. So if you're interested in comic books, you can write a very great essay about societal implications of a certain comic book character, or the influences of K-pop on, I don't know, something. or whatever the case is. There are a lot of different kinds of topics and approaches for this. So I indeed am encouraging you to find something that you truly care about. Go back to the things that you value. So what do you hold to be important? What are your interests? What are your career goals? What are your concerns in the world? And a whole range of different potential ideas are available to you. But just make sure it is indeed something you care about. This essay project is your chance to put into practice all the concepts we've been reading and learning about so far this semester, and to challenge our capabilities as writers, students, and thinkers. Be sure to review your notes and reread important selections we've covered from Everything's an Argument. Resist your familiar habits and practices as writers. Try something new and exciting. Follow your curiosity, take risks, and attempt to have fun while composing this essay, because it'll make a world of difference and it'll go a lot more smoothly for you, and indeed you'll be having fun. So, okay, I'm going to end this video just because it's getting a little long, and I'll pick it up in a second part where we'll talk about the challenges for this essay project. So stay tuned, everyone.